Hello, everybody, and welcome to Generally Casual. This is Michael, and your co-host here. We got Richard, we got Corey over there, and I can point at people because you can see me.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we are fresh on YouTube. This will probably be our 5th or 6th episode, so...
I'm still scared. Like, that just was super strong. Also, we're fresh on YouTube, like, out of the oven.
Yeah, I mean, really. I mean,
catch these casual buns when they're hot.
Somehow we're rated on Rotten Tomatoes
new
already.
t-shirt idea, casual buns.
No.
Have all of us turned around, and instead of our buns, then it has hot buns.
So, talking about something just as disturbing as that image in your mind, we're talking about monsters today.
Talk about monsters
In a roundabout way.
Yeah.
In
Or
movies.
monster movies.
In movies.
And-
Monsters in movies.
And it might surprise you to know that we watched movies spanning across a good portion of 100 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Surprisingly.
Yeah, nearly 100 years at this point. 90 years, basically, at this point.
Yeah, what year was Quiet Place?
2014?
14?
No,
15?
it's 16.
Yeah.
Maybe 18.
So 1932 to 2016 to 2018, since we don't know Quiet Place.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we know the host was 2016.
No, the host was
2006.
Yeah.
But
But we've just given away all our movies now. We haven't
That's
even
okay.
introduced them yet.
2018.
So
1932 to 2018.
yeah, we did sit down again, and we watched 3 more movies, and we each kind of picked one.
It was a wild ride.
Yeah, I was hoping that my pick would be a little better considering the
hype.
reviews around it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my god. And you know what?
All over.
You know
All
what?
over
We're
the
not going to
box.
get to it yet, but I'm just like the nitpicky reviews for some of these movies and then the non-nitpicky reviews for that movie. I was like,
It was a little all over the place.
yeah, I mean, obviously that movie, the host was rated less than A Quiet Place, but I'm like,
Yeah.
some people can just be nitpicky for no reason, but that's the world we live in.
They're like, this movie's too good. I have to knock it down a few pegs.
Yeah, they were like, I was expecting AAA. It was, I just wanted my head to be blown off and be dead in the movie. And then you know what? You know what didn't happen? I didn't die. And you know what? That's stupid. So I hate this movie now.
I've lost track of the point that you're trying to bring. But anyway.
I was going to say, so I don't think we necessarily need to do a definition because our last episode had the definition for monster movies.
Yeah, hold on, I got it. They're monster movies.
They're monsters that are in movies.
In movies, yes.
It's a
Yes.
monstrous thing.
Yeah,
in
and
a
the
movie.
the first movie we're going to talk about is Monster House.
What?
So,
Well, did we actually want to change it up this time? Because I think it would be a good platform to springboard off of mine into yours, Michael.
yes, yours
and
is the
then
most controversial
finish
pick.
on
Yeah,
yours,
that's
Richard.
good because in reality, mine or roundabout where mine was is actually kind of the start of where monster movies started.
And not to sound like an anime or a TV show where we just mention things and don't talk specifically about them.
Yeah.
Richard's pick was The Mummy, Corey's pick was The Host, and mine was A Quiet Place.
Well, we
Oh, we
already
should've-
intro-
oh.
yeah.
We should have just
introduced them
waited
all,
till the
but-
end and said, like, could you figure it out?
Did you figure it out in the first 5 minutes?
Who's that Pokemon?
Certainly not The Host.
Yeah, so the movie I picked was The Host. I really like foreign movies and films, so I wanted to choose a monster movie that was well regarded, that I hadn't seen yet, and that was foreign. Because I thought it would be a little more interesting than rather just do like old school, midway point and new school sort of film.
And to
which
be honest,
we did last time.
This movie,
I'm
The
sorry.
Host,
Hold on. The Host on Rotten Tomatoes got 93%.
Wait, Richard, hold on. You have to see it's 93% from critics. From critics.
That's insane.
It does not have 93%
Well,
from
it's
the audience.
72%.
Yes, but that's
That's
a drastic.
a very
also,
big
look how many
difference.
reviews: 155 critics,
100,000
100,000 plus audience. But I wanted to mention that it's also from famed director. It's Bong Joon-ho, who also directed The Parasite, which is a phenomenal movie and had like wide raving reviews across the world.
It was Academy Award nominated and I think won.
It won, best foreign film, and it was
just called Parasite.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I think there is also a movie called The Parasite.
Yeah, which is not good.
Yeah.
So, what I found interesting about this movie, and I feel like you guys are kind of on the same train of thought as I am, is that the movie was actually shot extraordinarily well. The cast was fantastic, and like the sound was actually really, really good. Like there were a few moments, and I think with monster movies, it's really important. Like with horror movies, the direction they go with sound is super important because it kind of gives little cues or little like auditory feedback for the watcher to like feel more immersed in the movie. Kind of like we mentioned with Kroll when the spines of the alligator like clacked against the pipe. Like that's a very
That was really good.
immersive moment. So with The Host, there were plenty of those moments where you hear the monster or you hear footsteps or you would hear its weird like hissing like I don't know, have weird noises or it's weird like swinging noise.
Hey, editor, input audio cue here of the hissing noise.
But I can't do that.
But it was awesome in those aspects. But where it kind of fell a little bit flat for me was the whole the way that it went about explaining why certain things were happening, and just kind of like the way that it resolved, because it very much was like throughout the entire movie, like the direction of the main protagonist was, I've got to save my daughter, I've got to do this, I got to find her, and then it gets to the climax and it kind of just falls flat a little bit.
Yeah, and if you don't know, the basic premise of this monster movie is someone dumped something in a river.
We have no idea
something
what
happened, and then there was a monster that came out of a river like maybe 3 days later.
It's like
no, it was years later.
Oh, it was years later.
Yeah,
it's like
was
giant,
years later?
Yeah, they did say that.
giant
there was a time
six-legged
dilation.
fish
Monkey.
monster thing.
Fish monkey.
Because it would literally like hang upside down from things and then like swing around.
Yeah.
It was
And then on top of that, after the monster was released, then it centers around a family who lives there, who basically runs a mini like
Convenience
shop for people who go
snack
visit the
shop.
river. And then it tells their story and their interactions with the monster, and then
goes over every single family member too.
Yes, and then it goes over basically the monster's interaction with the city.
yeah.
Which I did find rather funny. They
the government.
actually pretty much do a small little highlight indirectly about each of the family members, focused mostly on the grandfather, the main son, who's the father, minor stuff about the daughter, and then the sister was like more part of the movie because she was like a medal-winning archer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the other son who was like a businessman that they talked about or he's still in college, but
he
graduated.
was a failed graduate.
There you go.
Yeah, he graduated and couldn't find a job.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was just weird how they like actually explain a lot about the family in indirect methods. And then there's a whole like subplot about the government aspect, and the monsters just kind of intermingled throughout the entire thing.
So yeah, for me, if we were to relate it to the previous episode where we'd talked about the creature features and how involved the monster is in the plot, or whether it's kind of a obstacle, I would say that the creature kind of isn't that centrifugal to the plot, in all honesty, because a lot of the complications that arise in the movie is either because of the government not listening, like you said, or the fact that the daughter is missing. So you could insert something else in there and, you know, it would follow a similar premise.
Yeah, the funny thing is to me, it would make more sense to insert some sort of kind of what we did last episode. Some sort of natural monster in whatever area that is. Like it could be some sort of large crocodile or gator or something like that, or like that's
not the monkey fish.
Yeah, it's just like they had to throw some sort of weird alien-like sea monster thing in there just to make it abnormal.
Now, the most upsetting part is literally on the front cover of anywhere you see this movie, it relates it to Jaws and saying that this movie is just as good as Jaws. And to be honest, It has some good reviews out there, and a lot of people do like it. My biggest problem with it is, me personally, my opinion, it's not scary at all. Like, there's no point. There's maybe a few jump scares in it.
Minorly suspenseful.
Yeah, but they always intro those jump scares by having something that's completely not scary and very much like, oh, this is exactly what the monster's going to do. Example, like someone will run away from the monster and then hide in something. And the monster will be following them. And then suddenly the monster attacks that hole. Yeah. And it's like, why is that you're not making me more scared because we know the monster's still there.
And as we were watching, we were kind of figuring out that it wasn't exactly like it was trying to be a super scary movie because it had so many strangely comedic elements to it.
It's kind of a spoof almost.
Yeah. But what was interesting was that...
satirical, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of the characters are satirical, or they're kind of like very caricaturized, if that's the correct word.
Especially,
they're
caricatures of themselves.
Yeah. So like...
the most dramatic portion or comedic portion.
Yeah,
like,
it was
the example is like
extremes.
the father is lazy and stupid and things like they constantly bring that up throughout the film about how lazy and stupid he is. And how terrible of a father he is throughout the entire thing.
Throughout the whole thing, it's like the whole family suffers from just moments of weakness. Is like the daughter could be a gold medalist, but she always waits too long.
She hesitates.
Yeah, and the other son could be amazing because he graduated, but he just never got off his butt and got the job. And he blames the system for not getting a job.
Right.
The main son, he's lazy, but he's also like, quote unquote, a good dad.
Well, and that's the funny thing is...
and the grandpa's like the only one who's working hard.
Yeah. Well, and then at the same time, he's like... there was that funny story in there about how the grandpa knew that the son was a good son because he would always give people directions.
No, he looked like he could give directions. So people would walk up to him and ask him for directions.
That's what it is.
He never covered if he actually gave good directions. So, like, and the grandpa believed a little too much in his kids.
Yeah. And there was obviously heartwarming family elements and things like that.
I mean, a bronze medal in the Olympics is still really good.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was a national tournament.
Yeah, still really good.
But it was a very dysfunctional family. Mm-hmm. And it was just interesting overall, but unfortunately, I just had some issues with how it kind of ended.
Yeah.
Which kind of transitions rather well, because one of the things that the host did the most poorly was the explanation of events and why things are happening.
Oh my goodness.
And they did that in the whole like, well, we're not going to tell you explicitly because you can figure it out. But they did that in a way that wasn't exactly satisfactory. But in A Quiet Place, I would say they do that fantastically.
Yeah, and for all of you who watched the first movie and maybe are a little bit more judgmental of that movie, the movie doesn't directly explain where these creatures from, but if you look into the movie and take the time to see all the other clues that they throw out, there's newspaper clippings, there's hints throughout the movie that tell you where these creatures come from. Or just go watch the second movie. And like, what it does so well that I think the host does not is that it tells a good story from beginning to end while keeping that central theme of going... literally the title, it's A Quiet Place. Mm-hmm. And that is the theme of the movie. Any sound is accompanied by, is almost jarring.
Yeah.
When you hear music for the first time from headphones, like actual loud music, that's jarring for how quiet the rest of the movie. Everybody knows sign language, so you have to rely on the subtitles. And it just adds to the thematic like sounds the whole time.
I was going to say one of the main things that I thought, if we're comparing the two, that the host does not do well by comparison to The Quiet Place is the host, you're constantly seeing the monster before action sequences happen.
Yes.
So Quiet Place, around, doing backflips at random points.
Well, and that's the thing is, A Quiet Place, you hear something, you hear sound, and then you see the faces of all the actors in their suspenseful, like, is something going to happen? Mm-hmm. And that's what the like most suspenseful part of that movie is you don't know.
Especially the first 10 minutes of that movie.
Yeah. Versus in The Host, it's like the monster's just treating the whole entire town like a jungle gym half the time. And you're like, oh, cool. What's this monster going to do now?
I also love how for the good chunk of the host, it's like, I'm just picking people up with my mouth and put them in a hole. And then for some reason, it just changes and it completely demolishes people and eats them fully.
Yeah.
Well, and what's weird about it is it seemed like it was selective on which ones it actually was killing versus not. And then you see them in the hole and some of them are dead and then some of them are, and it's just like, what?
And it keeps carrying people in its mouth and then not doing it. Yeah, anyways.
A
ahead,
Quiet Place was much more tonally consistent of a movie than The Host.
Oh, yeah,
and I think that was what was a big distinction of it. Especially when A Quiet Place goes so heavy-handed. Like, it put all its eggs in one basket when it comes to, like, sound being the primary motivator for the movie. So if they slipped up, it would have been really easy for the movie not to hit its full stride.
Yeah, and to be honest, the movie, I mean, all the people who worked on it were so smart in thinking about all the ways that you would have to minimize sound. Especially if you're in the middle, like, that's their farm and their farmland, and there could be 1,000 things there that you could step on in a crunch that would creak. And there's like paint markers, there's sand, there's all these things that they go out of their way to be like, we have literally marked every single location where it's silent.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have had to test that at some point. There's so much history that's not told, but is seen through the cinematography. And it's just so good.
Well, and they do a really good thing is they do day numbers, so you can clearly see there is a time jump between different parts of the movie, so you can see them getting into. You don't have to see all the different trials and tribulations.
Yeah,
they already figured it out.
And Corey said this earlier. They're actual people in an actual situation.
Yeah,
and they're not the most perfect people, like always doing the perfect thing and always making sure that they're like double checking and triple checking, because that's not really realistic. There is not a perfect person who's going to be 100% focused constantly at all times of your life, especially with kids. And I love the way that A Quiet Place just shows what real people would do in a situation like this. Because there's always a person who's like out there shouting, going, well, why would you have a baby? Or like, why'd they let the kid wander off? It's like, probably because they've done this over and over and over again. I mean, by that time it was like day
400 something.
Yeah.
No. When the kid passed, it was like day 89.
89.
Yeah. It's only been 3 months since they started this. There's no routine there.
No.
And they don't know 100% how to act. I mean, they already have sand that's buried, and they're already accustomed to the situation. It's a great thing that they're not dead.
Not to mention, children inherently, no matter how well behaved a child is, especially a young child, they are selfish in their nature, because that portion of their brain that sort of is able to emulate how other people would feel isn't as developed as an adult. So if a child sees something and goes like, I really want that, that's going to be a driving force for them in their brain.
That kid was 4 years old as well.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing about it, is that the older daughter, she just wanted to help him out. She didn't think he was going to grab the batteries later, because they pulled the batteries out. You could just have the spaceship. It's not loud anymore.
Yeah.
And it was just a series of unfortunate events at that point. And like a lot of the things, they're easily replaceable. You could have held that kid 100% of the time, but I'm sure after 3 months of living in near terror, you're probably trying to figure out the best way to go about things.
You have to live in the new normal.
Yes, well, you have to live in the new normal. And that changes constantly by day by day.
Yeah. And you would get complacent too. Like, you would have a routine and you would get complacent in your routine. You would start to make assumptions that your child would do the correct thing because they've done that thing all up until that point. So it is honestly, it's very true, and it feels more raw because it's less of a like, well, these are just people acting. And it's like, no, these are how real people in this situation would behave.
And you know what? I could also honestly think that maybe that's why there's a good chunk of people out here who hate the movie. It's because that might happen to you too. Maybe they see the piece of themselves in the movie and going, oh, I would absolutely do that. So I hate this movie because this is what I would do.
Yeah.
Like, I would have absolutely not function correctly.
And obviously, being that they did so well, like creating this situation and how everything, then that creates more opportunity for people to poke holes in things that they quote unquote didn't do correctly or things like that.
Absolutely.
I would die so fast. Like the moment that I see a pair of barbecue tongs, like click click, gotta test those tongs, and then I'm dead. The aliens come after me.
And that's the ridiculous part. I mean, we mentioned while we were watching the movie is like, what about the wildlife? What about like, and certain wildlife is pretty quiet. I mean, like birds for the most part probably won't be targeted by these creepy alien things. But they did so well also with the creation of these aliens. The many different panels on their head that shift so that way the sound can come to them.
Yeah, that is crazy.
The like the inner ear on those creatures, like zooming in.
The fact that like they have panels that open up on their side of there, and that basically creates like a funneling auditory funnel for like sound and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like a dog ear, how it's directional except to the extreme.
Absolutely. And this is the thing. The movie was entertaining, and that's honestly some of the main opinions about movies is, did you enjoy it? And honestly, for the host so far, I did enjoy it. Can I pick apart that movie? Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. It's not a AAA movie for me, but it was enjoyable. Am I going to watch it again? Well, who knows? A Quiet Place, I did watch again. This is my second or third viewing of it, and to be honest, I almost teared up and cried at the end again because it's so emotional.
So, Michael, I want to ask you, since you've seen Parasite, do you think that Host deserves its place in his kind of growth journey, the director's journey to Parasite? Being that you know where kind of his finalization is, and he definitely spent a very much portion of his kind of directorial stuff to get to where he is. Do you think the Host was a growth to that?
And to be honest, for anybody listening, I would love to just do a podcast dedicated to this director because he has a bunch of movies out. I think the Host led to the familial
family
relationships.
Okay.
Because that is 100% the focus of Parasite. And because he does that really, really well.
Makes sense.
He does that in Snowpiercer too. Like he creates like character bonds really well. That seems to be his strong suit. It's about like community or like family ties.
And I think throughout his movies, not culminating with Parasite because I hope he makes more movies. I think it's led to Parasite, and hopefully Parasite will be the jumping off points for him to make an even greater movie.
Okay.
Because it's really good. Now, speaking of a movie that is shorter.
Well, before we get there, what did you think of the monsters in A Quiet Place? So we mentioned their design, but to the plot, like, do you feel as though they're as important as the characters were, or they're more so just the obstacle?
I think they're as important because I don't think it's easy to replace them. I don't think it's easy to have something
be such a permanent threat.
Yeah, in like the last movie, like Crawl, like a flash flood could easily replace that, and that you just have a disaster movie at that point. What was the other two movies? We watched Jaws and we watched Snakes on a Plane.
Yeah.
Snakes on a Plane, easily replaceable with snakes, but it doesn't make the movie. Like, that movie relies on the snakes being ridiculous, so that makes the movie comedic. This movie, they're similar to Bird Box. It creates such a devastation to the world that you are now limited in all actions. I don't know. Have you guys seen Bird Box?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have not.
Okay, well.
Really good.
Yeah, really good movie. And nice spin on that genre. But Bird Box, basically whatever happens in the movie creates such an apocalypse that people have to limit the way they act in the world.
Right.
This does the same thing. And because sound's such an important thing to us nowadays, it creates such a dynamic shift. The last time I felt this dynamic shift, not that it's a great movie, but was Gravity. Gravity uses sound to such a profound, like, you don't understand how much it's important until you just watch people in space just sitting there and there's
no sound.
There's nothing.
Well, that's interesting too, because if we say Bird Box is See No Evil, and then A Quiet Place is Speak No Evil.
Speak No Evil.
Then we just need one more to finish off the Trinity,
About
which would be Hear No Hear. Yeah. Like people are going around with like headphones on all the time and they can't listen to things. I don't know.
Like there's a sound going around the world constantly.
Huh.
That'd be certainly an interesting movie because everybody would be essential. Like each one is eliminating the sense. You got sight, you've got speech, and now you've got sound. And smell. No.
Well, you could also do one on like smell too.
To kind of loop back,
Stinky Earth 2022.
Quiet Place, the creatures obviously are centrifugal, but the element that they bring with the whole sound dynamic, even though it would be a different movie, there is another movie which I mentioned before we started recording called Don't Breathe, which is a very similar concept, but it's one person who is blind, and so they purely rely on sound, and they're kind of the quote-unquote killer, in which case then everyone else has to be quiet.
Yeah.
So there is similar elements in what A Quiet Place does, but instead of it being monsters, you're in a house with someone who can hear exceptionally well.
He's a monster.
Yeah. Exactly.
But like I get what you're saying, Michael, is that it's so centrifugal to the plot because the universe and the setting that it has is such a grand scale. Like you can't just have one guy oppresses the entire planet because it's
no. Like, and that's kind of what I mean. Like the whole element, the grandiose scale is what Quiet Place brings.
Yeah.
Versus if it was just in a house, you could change it to where it wouldn't be a monster.
And it doesn't answer like I mean the worst thing A Quiet Place does is it doesn't answer a bunch of questions. It's like there's a bunch of newspaper clippings in the background that answer where they came from, a meteorite, what the military did. It basically said guns and bombs don't work on these things, but it doesn't explain anywhere else in the world. Yeah. Obviously, this is set more than likely in America, and while they're describing the plot, it's like, okay, well, if the meteorite crash landed in America, it doesn't seem like these things can swim, so they probably can't get to anywhere else.
And they kind of had a moment where they sort of addressed that because John, I forget his name in the
father
film, the father goes through a book where he's striking off countries.
Yeah.
So he's been trying to reach them through an SOS on the radio, and he's striking off the countries that aren't responding. So he the last one he struck off was Tokyo.
Yeah.
So
and that's certainly an interesting way to go about it, is that it's dropping little plot points. And that's, again, compared to The Host, and compared to a lot of movies, there's not a lot of movies that like to gently bring you along with the story. They're very much in your face. Like a lot of monster movies are like, this is the problem. Look at it. Here's the explanation why it's a problem. Yeah. Okay, we're done. And it's the end of the movie.
And to kind of compare a movie that we didn't watch in this trilogy, Cloverfield kind of does that too, where they kind of just pick minor things and say, this is the information we're going to give you in this movie. And then in the next movie, we're going to give you different information. Yeah. And then in this movie, we're going to give you completely different information. So I think other monster movies, especially long-term series like Jaws, they just try and do it through 50 different movies instead of in one.
Yeah. And I think A Quiet Place, I don't know if it's just a prequel and sequel, or if they're making it a trilogy. It certainly would be interesting because there's a lot of little plot points in the movie that certainly make it really interesting. But like the movie we're going to talk about, it relies a lot on making sure they're telling you a full story.
Yes.
And that's actually why The Mummy, the 1932 Mummy, is actually really good for only being an hour long.
Yeah.
Because they tell you a full story in an hour.
So I'll talk kind of a little bit about why I chose this movie. For one, I wanted something that kind of harkened back to the original of what monster movies were, which in kind of the culmination, Universal Pictures put out movies that they called basically monster movies. If you go back to the origins of these movies, there was technically a foreign film, actually two foreign films that were like based off of Dracula. And then basically Universal took over the entire thing and we're like, okay, we're going to release monster movie after monster movie. So Frankenstein, they did two different Draculas, I think. They did The Mummy, they did Wolfman, they did Creature from the Black Lagoon. All those are classic films. And the reason why I chose this one, number one, before watching, because I hadn't seen it before, I thought it was more like the 1990s Mummy, where the mummy was actually a mummy throughout the most of, like, at least half of the movie.
They found the tomb and the mummy escaped, and then it turned into a sand cloud. Apparently.
So the funny thing is in the 1932 movie, the mummy was only a mummy for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, he was kind of like, for the rest of the film, just like supernatural guy.
He was a guy with really wrinkly skin.
A really wrinkly skin.
Who was played by Boris Karloff, who also played Frankenstein's monster in the Universal picture Frankenstein as well. So very ambitious actor and blah blah. Obviously, most of the black and white movies from those ages had like very prolific actors and things like that. Something that I had to explain to Corey during the movie was talking about how in black and white movies, a lot of the like emotion was done through eyes. They're really big on filming like eyes to signify like I'm in love with this character, so I'm gonna stare at you directly in the eyes.
Staring like,
yeah, like straight up.
You love me.
Yeah, so
you love me.
Except like 5 minutes of just female actress staring up and male actor staring down. It was like really strange and uncomfortable, which it did kind of set the tone because everyone else in the room is like, "What's going? Are you okay? Can I take you out?" And she's like, "No, I want to stay." And I'm just like, "What's going on here?"
So, basic plot of The Mummy is there is a dig that's been going on for a while, apparently 20 years or something like that, as the old guy says. But they go and they discover that there's a mummy who's in the side of the room in terms of that. Then they find a new discovery with this box. And they basically say, leave the box alone. And of course, this young guy who's reckless doesn't listen and opens up a box. And it has a scroll in there, the scroll of Thoth, which then resurrects the mummy, who then grabs the scroll of Thoth and walks out of the building, walks out of the tomb. And then causes this younger guy just
part of the movie.
Insanely laughing, and they're like, "What's wrong?" And he's like, "He just went out for a stroll," and just starts laughing and basically going crazy. And then obviously after that, the actual plot happens where the mummy himself is trying to find his lost love because that's why he was condemned to all eternity. Blah blah blah.
And it's like a 16-year time jump or something, right?
It was like 1920 something to 1932. So it was like within, I think, between 10 and 15 years, I think, between the time jump.
Yeah, and to be honest, a lot of the effects in the movie are very limited, but definitely work to its advantage. A lot of cuts between like face changes. I still love that. Like when the mummy looked into the big reflecting pool, that they were able to like accurately make it look like there was something being shown in there.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the cool thing was they started out with fog, and then literally the fog like quickly got blown away to that visual scene. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, and it did so well of like just moving the plot along. I was worried that the movie was gonna be an hour and 45 and it was gonna be super slow, and it was just going. It was going. It never stopped. And to be honest, during the entire movie, I was not bored. It was very entertaining.
Yeah. It moved the plot right along, and even though there were some sequences where it was like, no, yes, like of classic film, that it still was very much a like, here's why this is important. Here's why this is important. Here's why this was important. There were two like really good elemental sequences that I was really impressed by. For one, the close-up shot on Boris Karloff's face, where everything else was around his face was really dark, and then his eyes like got really
glowing.
bright and glowy. That was really cool.
And that was any time he did like his little magic thing.
Yeah. And then the other one was at the end of the film where they defeat the mummy or whatever, and then he transitions into a skeleton. In classic movies, usually they'll do like basically blend fades, and they kind of did that, but they actually did it really well, where basically it was like he started and then he had like extra makeup on, and then he had like a skull face, and then he was a skeleton. And that was actually really kind of cool because for the 1930s, like I'm like, wow, they did really well.
It was almost as though they put like they filmed 2 shots, and then they had a period where the film, 2 sets of film was overlapping on the same frame. So it was really cool. But speaking of the close-ups, one of the close-ups that wasn't done well, that Michael pointed out, was the hand shot of the little idol necklace thing. Because in the original scene where they show it, they're in the office, and it's like, take this. And
it's a close-up on the hand.
It's a close-up on the hand. And then in another scene where they show it again, they're in a car, and he's like, now take it again. You need it. And it's like, the same hand shot. But they're in the car this time. So, because one of my observations as well was they do very few panning shots, which I don't know if that's a technological limitation.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, because they would set all their cameras up similar that we have ours.
And just roll.
It's just a tripod.
Static.
Yep. Yes. And then they would use multiple angles if they could.
So, like, that was really interesting, but I think it really was the close-up, the facial close-ups that... it was really interesting seeing where following movies, like I mentioned Hitchcock, like directors would have gotten a lot of influence from scenes like that. And obviously that a lot of the acting was very intense because it's a period piece essentially,
melodramatic,
being very dramatic, and their whole idea of romance is very... The romance is creepy. I'm just gonna say it right now. Like
I have to save you, and therefore you will love me.
I just met you. We're in love. Marry me. But it's a lot of weird stuff,
especially with the doctor being involved. Like it was the female lead's doctor who was like, I can tell that you like her, and she likes you too.
It's
approve.
Like,
what? And then why are you being involved in this relationship?
Like the museum curator, like, was one of the guy's dad.
Yeah,
and then they both walk in on them kissing. And then they were like, good.
And then the guy immediately stands up and
he
is
teleports
on the other side
behind
of the couch.
her. Yeah, and I was like, there's a lot of strange cuts that way.
Yeah,
where they're like, they just avoided the part of being like, oh, now we got to watch him walk behind her. It's like, no, we'll just skip that.
Yeah, so he'll just be behind her.
I don't know how I stand compared to you guys, but even though this is technically considered a monster movie, there really wasn't much of a monster. It was just kind of like
it was a dude.
2 stalkers pitting against each other.
There was a mummy's foot and a mummy's hand.
Oh, and his bandage.
Yeah.
Yes.
But like one's a stalker for the present girl, and the other one is the stalker that leapt through time to bring back his love.
So that actually was something that astounded me because, and this is why, so The Mummy has actually been technically remade more than once. It was redone in the 90s and then also redone in the 2000s with Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
I think Tom Cruise completely changed the plot, mostly. But the 1990s movie actually was kind of the 1930s movie as well.
Do not read from the book.
Yeah, I mean, they changed, obviously, plot points to make it more of an action-heavy 90s movie, but it had Imhotep in it, which was also in the 1930s. It had Anaxonamun, which was also in the 1930s.
And the plot line of Imhotep wanting to bring back
his love.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting that they changed minor tweaks, but more or less it was a similar movie to the 1932 classic.
They modernized it and elongated it by maybe 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think it was like over an hour and a half or
and
nearly
then put
2
the
hours.
creepy scarabs.
I don't know.
Well, and obviously iconic Brendan Fraser, who's also fantastic.
Really good. But I don't know if it's just like it doesn't come across as a monster movie to me because I feel like in The Mummy, the 1930 whatever version, he's just not as present as of a threat as they typically are in other monster movies.
It's almost like a historical retelling of a story that never happened.
Well, that's why I think in the 90s one, technically the Mummy is more of a threat because he like literally drains people to then...
The mummy's a mummy.
Yeah.
And is like a mystic mummy that has special powers. And the only thing we see the mummy do in the 1930s version is he sticks his ring out and says some words, and then people have a natural heart attack.
Well, and he technically also does that through the pool. Like, he kills a couple of people that way.
But all the same way.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any other spells. And, like, that's it.
Well,
like,
technically, it's not like he was that bad a guy if, like, objectively speaking.
If he didn't kill all the people.
He killed a security guard that was trying to stop him. He killed the museum curator who stole something from him, technically.
It was his, yeah.
And he attempted to kill the son who he thought was stealing his love of his life.
Right.
So those were the three people that he technically, like, I get it, murder's wrong. But in the grand scheme of monster movies, he's kind of an innocent monster.
The funny thing is technically, if we go back to our original question about the obstacles, technically all the obstacles were thrown at him.
Yeah, it was a movie. No, it was literally a movie about his story, not about the other people. And you know what was funny is the only time he was an actual bad guy is when his love said, "Don't do that to me. I'm a priestess. I'm a priestess of Isis.
Yeah,
and I'm literally the anti of what you are.
Right.
Even though they loved each other, and then he was like, "No, I'm gonna do it anyways." It's like, oh well, now you're a bad guy.
Now you're a bad guy.
Yeah, you should stop.
She did not consent.
Yeah, she did not consent to be turned into a mummy.
But yeah, so like compared to the other two movies where we were like, is the monster centrifugal to the plot, or is it more of an obstacle? This one is the antithesis to what Jaws was, where Jaws was both. The Mummy is neither.
Right.
It doesn't really fit into either of those categories.
Now, the nicest part about the host and A Quiet Place is that the title is not the monster. So it does. They both, well, whatever the host means.
Yeah, we couldn't figure that out.
Yeah, we couldn't figure that out. But like those two movies don't have to be entirely about the creature in the movie. If you watch a movie like Jaws, it's got to be about the shark. It's you can't have a movie called The Shark and then not be about a shark. Like, so The Mummy was about the mummy, but it was more of a story than really a monster flick, because
that's what kind of disappointed me about it, because I was expecting with all of the stuff, if you literally look up 1932 Mummy, most of it is literally the one scene where he actually was in his full bandages and stuff like that. All over every single cover for the movie, everything like that. It makes it seem like he's going to be a mummy throughout this entire thing.
Yeah.
And he's not.
And like walking around, like not trying to be seen.
Like Abbott and Costello Mummy.
Yeah, maybe sucks the life out of somebody and then turns back into his normal form.
Like the 1990s Mummy.
Yeah. But for the most part, no, it really wasn't a traditional. Like The Creature from the Black Lagoon, if I'm not mistaken, is all about the Creature from the Black Lagoon. Dracula is all about Dracula. Frankenstein's all about Frankenstein.
Wolfman, all about Wolfman.
Yeah, and about their interactions with other people in the story.
And that's literally as classic as you can get most of the time. It's like there's a scary teen blah 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 situation. Oh, the Wolfman's gonna come out and scare everybody. Like that's But if you think of classic horror monster movie, that's exactly what that is. Versus The Mummy is not.
It was just an entertaining story. That's it. That's what it was.
Well, we accidentally did two monster movies in a romance flick. Because that's what The Mummy kind of is.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, more or less, yeah. I was going to say, I would compare it closer to Casablanca than I would A Quiet Place or Host.
Will they, won't they? Will they, won't they?
Yeah.
It's just a weirdly messed up version of Casablanca.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think out of all three of these movies, we can rate one as a pretty decent movie that doesn't over-rely on the monsters, but the monsters set the universe. And then we can go to Host, which is a smattering of a bunch of different genres put in the one movie that does family relationships really well, but the monster is sort of here and there. And The Mummy, of course, is a romantic story, and it's very touching, and you'll cry a lot watching it.
No.
I just wanted the mummy get married.
I would recommend, if you want to kind of view a classic movie, it's still a good movie.
It holds up,
but watch the 1990s.
Actually, watch the 1930s. It's only an hour, and then go watch the 1990s and be like, "Wow, I love you, Brendan Fraser."
It's Rachel Weisz, Brendan Fraser, awesome.
Seeing the parallels is definitely cool. But it was a lot of fun doing this like triple movie lineup thing again, because I feel like it's interesting enough to have a discussion about one movie, but by having a couple other movies that are in the same genre that you can run parallel to each other, it helps you appreciate what each individual movie did well in itself.
Yeah.
A little bit more. So, yeah. And if you guys have another monster movie that you guys love to death, or maybe even hate, and you think it was a really bad example of a monster movie, let us know. We appreciate any feedback at Generally Casual, whatever platform. We're there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are definitely on Spotify. We're definitely on Apple Podcasts. Both of those.
And YouTube
Feel
now.
free.
Yeah.
YouTube. Yep.
Yeah.
Any other podcast platforms you can think of, we're probably on that too.
And any podcast will host your ears by tuning into us. So, thank you and have a good night.